Hi, this is Carys. This week, Gary and I discussed the betting scandal that has engulfed Westminster. We don't talk about the Conservative MP who has just been accused of placing an £8,000 bet on himself to lose his seat at this election. The man in question is Philip Davis. Not going to lie, he slightly undermines some of my theory in this week's show, but nonetheless, I stand by my core point. Betting on the outcome of the election when you don't have insider knowledge is not the biggest problem facing our politics.
Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys and this is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
Every week, Carys and I will be talking about those stories in the news that are over-reported and the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
If you want to support the show, we now have a Patreon. Search for Over the Top and Under the Radar on the Patreon website.
Carys, what have you been up to?
Many things.
Many things.
Not that many things.
Look at you.
But I did go to see Bad Boys 4, I believe we're now in the franchise, the Will Smith.
Okay,
Martin Lawrence
hang on.
movie.
I want to stop you there. Going to see anything that's got a number 4 by its side, that's like gas station sushi.
So what, you're ruling out every Fast and the Furious film after 4, Gary? Your loss.
After 2.
Anyway, I'm going to say that the Bad Boys franchise is pretty single-handedly maintaining toxic masculinity. For a while, I thought, this is a spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the latest Bad Boys movie and wants to, maybe skip 30 seconds. Don't laugh. Our listeners might like Bad Boys.
Or just don't do it.
Well, the reason I was a bit like, okay, this is problematic, I thought there was going to be a mental health storyline because Will Smith had a panic attack in one of the scenes because he's had a lot of trauma and his old police detective died and he blames himself. So I was like, okay, Bad Boys, come through, mental health, etc. In the final fight scene, Will Smith gets another panic attack and he can't shoot the sniper rifle to get the baddie. We've all been there. And Martin Lawrence gets him out of the panic attack by slapping him in the face.
Ah, there you go.
That's right. We're getting flashbacks. We're getting like all of Will's trauma.
I had a therapist like that once. It was really hard.
And those of you who know, who have better knowledge of toxic and fragile masculinity, please tell me if I'm wrong. But I was like, what could be more toxic? They built up this narrative arc, and then in the end of the day, he just needed his buddy to give him a slap around the face and be like, "Come on, Mike, we need Beast Mike. Let's go." How was your weekend? What have you been up to?
I went camping with my daughter's class. Not a school trip. It's a kind of independent trip organised by some of the other parents. I'm going to be a little bit careful here because it turns out that some of the parents do listen to the podcast. And
hi, everyone.
And I have a reputation among these people for being a camping hater. I do enjoy these trips. For 3 reasons. My daughter really wants to go on them. That's good. When you go camping, interestingly, you don't really have to parent that much. They just go. And the third, the chat and the parents, they're nice. But here's the thing about camping that I don't understand. It's misdescribed as a kind of holiday or some kind of vacation. But you come back much more tired than when you left because you haven't slept.
Because you're sleeping on the bare earth like an animal, Gary.
Anyhow, I went camping. And that day, in the morning, welcome to my world, people. In the morning, I spoke at NEU Windrush event, National Education Union, and twice had conversations, firstly NEU, second around the campsite, with lifelong Labour voters, 2 black women, both of whom were like, yeah, not this time, not voting Labour this time.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Anything particular that pushed them over the edge or just generally feel a bit like?
The Diane Abbott thing really soured them. And somehow, and it's intriguing to me because these are people who would have voted Labour in 97. It seemed like they'd reached a threshold. And I do feel like this election, where kind of, in a way, nothing has happened. The polls are barely shifted. Reform's bump has gone down. You got one party not saying anything useful and another party just not saying anything. And they're the 2 main parties. This has been a highly racialized election, I think.
I think there's a couple of things, because one thing is a national trend, which is a low level of enthusiasm for and like affection for both of the leaders of the main parties. And like, I would guess that the Labour Party's overall favourables and Keir Starmer's favourable ratings, I think he's net unfavourable. We're probably going to get a landslide Labour government, and most people aren't very excited about the person in charge of that. And then I do think there's a specific thing that's gone on for those of us who aren't white around racism, migration. All of this stuff has felt particularly poisonous in this election. Jonathan Ashworth, another senior frontbencher, was being interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire in the face of Victoria Derbyshire asking him about people coming from Afghanistan to seek asylum in the UK. He just kept talking about putting people on planes back to Bangladesh.
And to be clear, they weren't saying that Bangladeshi Britons should be sent back to Bangladesh. But two things. First of all, we're in Windrush scandal territory here, where you start with an aggressive immigration message like hostile environment, which most of the Labour Party voted for. You start with a conversation about that. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know who's going to get caught up in that. And secondly, this is a conversation taking place post Shamima Begum, which is, we can take your citizenship from you. Bad behaviour. And if you take both of those two things, the Windrush scandal, Shamima Begum, then the whole mentioning of Bangladesh when you've got a settled community becomes super toxic.
I think the thing that upsets me, we talked about this last week, the sort of disconnect between how people feel about immigration, the facts on the ground, and then this bit is about also the rhetoric and how the rhetoric then drives people's attitudes. The fact that Victoria Derbyshire was trying to get Jonathan Ashworth to engage with is a lot of people coming here on small boats seeking asylum are coming from Afghanistan. And she picked that country because it's a country that we invaded.
We bombed.
So it did feel pretty dog whistly. Focus group says people don't like Bangladeshis. Because if you look at any of the stats about people coming in legally or illegally to this country, Bangladesh is not top 3. My sense is that country's come up. People have said it. And so it's a quick sort of shorthand. I think it's pretty cynical and pretty horrible. And taken with things like the Diane Abbott thing, yeah, it just leaves a pretty bad taste in one's mouth.
I think it's strategic. What was that attempt to humiliate Diane Abbott about? It could only have been worth their trouble if they thought it was going to be signalling to someone else that this is how we deal with them.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it necessarily strategic. Like, I think we saw the Diane stuff was a miscalculation. There are people who are in charge of the Labour Party whose blood really gets up when they get to kick the left. And they probably don't unpack why they really get a thrill out of kicking Diane Abbott, spoiler alerts, because they're racist and sexist. And so I think they just kicked her one time too many and massively underestimated. I think the Bangladeshi comments, they don't even sound natural. They don't sound like good talking points. Maybe it's all strategic and some of it's bad strategy. It's pretty short-sighted because it's based on an assumption that the Labour Party can be as unpleasant as it likes to people of colour and they will always still vote Labour, which we know from the two women you spoke to on the weekend, that isn't true. I don't buy that it even really works for Labour because it's not authentic. If you want someone who's going to be really horrible to non-white people and immigrants, vote Reform. Kind of depressed me, to be honest.
I think, and I've thought for a little while, that there's a case for just doing an over-the-top about the election because they're covering it like it's a Super Bowl when actually it's like a sort of Sunday afternoon kick-around in a way. It should be interesting. It is important, but they have laid it out in a way that make it look like the stakes are so low and they will promise so little. And Labour's just like, just not being them will be enough. They're after a massive electoral victory with no ideological content. It remains to be seen if there'll be a political advantage or whether, as a result of them being in, they will do the things that the Tories do, but just better managed.
And I think that is different to 97. As much as New Labour don't share my politics, they had a vision, a value set and an agenda. And this really feels
empty calories.
It's kind of the party when everyone's left, right? And you're there just, no one to snog, no food, booze is running low.
Just you and Keir in the kitchen.
Just me and Keir sharing a lukewarm red stripe. I doubt
Red Stripe probably wouldn't test well.
No, too ethnic.
English beer.
Too ethnic. They have it at Carnival. Yeah, obviously, we've luckily only have 1 week left of the election, and our next episode we're going to record will be post the vote. So yeah, on Thursday, the 4th of July, guess from around the time the polls close, those of you who support us on Patreon have access to the Over Under WhatsApp group, and Gary and I will be joining for the night to have a virtual election party with you.
You will have to bring your own bottle. It's going to be a virtual party, but we will be there. So join the Patreon package, because that will get you access. But then join us on election night. It's going to be a night to remember.
My over the top for this week is the betting scandal. A couple of weeks ago, a gentleman called Craig Williams, a former parliamentary private secretary to Rishi Sunak, was exposed to have bet £100 on the date of the general election. Craig had pretty good proximity to Rishi Sunak. The core of the scandal, which now involves about half a dozen political figures and I believe 5 or 6 Met police officers, is a bunch of people who we can reasonably assume might have known before everyone else that the election was going to be in July, placed bets on the date of the election. For me, this has just become the microcosm of all that is terrible and annoying about our political journalism. We've had 2 weeks of all the lobby journalists working themselves up into a frenzy about who knew what and there's another person. Days of just no real new news and a lot of sort of pearl clutching and what's going on. And then in the last week, Rishi Sunak has belatedly and wisely taken the decision to suspend the 2 candidates who've been accused of betting on the election when they knew when the election was going to happen. And then the bit that really made me just feel like I'm tapping out was when a Labour candidate in Suffolk was found to have bet against himself winning in the general election. And then in a piece of cheap and rubbish political theatre,
Cheap and
rubbish, Gary. It was crap. Keir Starmer kind of high-handedly was like, oh, he's off the ticket. He's fired. How dare he? All my candidates know.
Carys, that doesn't sound anything like Keir Starmer.
What are you talking about? That was great. It was perfect. Sorry. Yeah, I'll do it again. Sir Keir Starmer. He's off the ticket. All of my candidates know that you can't bet on the outcome of an election. I'm sorry. Okay. So first of all, betting is a great British pastime. My granddad was a bookie. Obviously, you have to be careful around gambling and it can be dangerous. There's absolutely nothing wrong with placing a bet, in my humble opinion.
Isn't there a problem with placing a bet on yourself?
So this is what I think the Labour candidate, it is materially different what he did to what the Tories and the police officers did. And we treat it as the same because of the way that we cover like scandals and gates. My man's the Labour candidate in Suffolk. Even if there is a tidal wave, it's not super likely that he's going to become an MP. And it doesn't take insider knowledge to know that, Gary. That's a Tory seat.
I agree with you about 2 things, but I don't agree with you about the third, right?
Hit me. Come at me.
I think it's quite sweet that you've adopted him as your man in Suffolk.
Kevin, my man.
2 things I think I agree with. First of all, this election is boring. So then any little distraction, the fact that we have massive increases in child poverty, a country that's on its knees, an NHS that's broken, we're actively participating in real time in a genocide. Well, I don't want to talk about that. So then they talk about this betting thing. Secondly, I do agree that there's no moral equivalence between having insider knowledge and just taking a punt on what is likely. But I think your man was out of line.
Big Kev.
I got to tell you, I think Kevin was out of line. I think you can't bet on yourself in a race that you're in.
But, yeah, I don't know Kevin, nor have I ever met him. He could be a real dick, so I don't want to cape him too hard. But the reason I'm annoyed is I looked at the headlines today and I saw not a long read, but a feature on whether Westminster has a betting problem. Gambling problems are real and serious. There is a culture of betting in Westminster. Probably going to get an inquiry. Maybe we'll get a ban on candidates being able to place bets. I'm not mad at it, Gary. It's not a terrible thing. Here's the thing I am annoyed about. In the last Parliament, or the last couple of parliaments, we've had a number of truly appalling scandals attached to Conservatives. I'm going to pick 3 of my favourites. First of all, Robert Jenrick. planning minister who was pretty clearly proven to have been corrupt. Him and Richard Desmond, a property developer, had a meeting at a fundraiser. After that meeting, Richard Desmond donates £12,000. So money, but not that big money. What does Richard Desmond get? He gets planning permission for a £1 billion project in Tower Hamlets. He gets to skip a community infrastructure levy. Robert General was the planning minister. He abused his power to give a rich guy planning permission. He's standing as an MP at the next election. Second example I want to talk about, Priti Patel. My girl went on holiday to Israel, a family holiday, and was found to have taken, depending on which report you believe, between 12 and 14 meetings with Israeli officials, business people, lobbyists. And when she was rightly forced to resign, her statement was barely apologetic. She's also standing and is touted as a future Conservative leader. And the final, my favourite, Gavin Williamson, who was sacked as Defence Secretary, associated with a leak from the National Security Council about Huawei's involvement in 5G networks. All these people are standing to be Tory MPs at the next election. All of them are going to continue to have political careers. I'm over it, Gary.
My over the top emerges from a beef between Kemi Badenoch and former Doctor Who David Tennant. And the roots of this are in the transgender debate, but that's not the thing that I particularly want to talk about. So we start with Kemi Badenoch, who is the Women and Equalities Minister for the Conservative Party. I'm pretty sure she's of Nigerian descent. She's a black woman. She has promised that the Conservatives will rewrite the definition of sex and allow organisations to bar transgender women from single-sex spaces and make clear that the protected characteristic of sex means biological sex. That's her position, and she's been very vocal about it for quite a long time. David Tennant, who I believe somewhat incidentally, although it speaks to the intensity with which he approaches this issue, has several children, one of whom is non-binary. He says at some kind of ceremony, until we wake up and Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore, he says, I don't wish ill of her, I just wish her to shut up. Whilst we live in this world, I'm honoured to receive this award that he got.
So the award was for Ally of the Year. It was an LGBTQ award ceremony, which I think is key context, and it was for Ally of the Year.
So he gets Ally of the Year. When he gets Ally of the Year, he says, until we wake up and Kemi Badenoch doesn't exist anymore, those are his quotes, I don't wish ill of her, I just wish her to shut up. And then Badenoch has responded to those comments by saying, I will not shut up, fair enough, I will not be silenced by men who prioritise applause from Stonewall over the safety of women and girls. Yeah. A rich lefty white male celebrity so blinded by ideology he can't see the optics of attacking the only black woman in government by calling publicly for my existence to end. Rishi Sunak has waded in and supported her. Keir Starmer felt the need, even though there's no Labour people involved in this at all, to wade in and distance himself from Tennant's remarks. I think, first of all, that David Tennant was wrong to talk about anybody actually like that. I also don't take him literally, but if we live in a world where we are going to criticise what the Tory leader said about Diane Abbott, then we can't get into motivation. This is what he said. And I also think it's a problem for large numbers of people who are not in one camp or the other when it comes to issues of sex and gender, but who are, evolving or who are listening, who are that kind of discussion, quote unquote, is so toxic and so mean that it doesn't help when people say, shut up and you shouldn't exist. I also think that Kemi Badenoch, who has, among other things, said there's a left-wing view of racial politics is assumed to be the black view of racial politics. Being black is not just about being a minority, but the rhetoric in this country is talk about us as though we're separate subspecies. She's talked about seeing her blackness as victimhood and whiteness as oppression. You don't just get to be black on Tuesdays, Kemi. You don't just get to leverage your blackness. You spent the last several years saying my race isn't, it's not really a feature. You should stop going on about it. And we should stop going on about it as victimhood and whiteness as oppression. To then say, a rich lefty white male celebrity, you can't see the optics of attacking the only black woman. It's like, you black now?
Well, it's worse than that, isn't it? Because she's trying to make a withdrawal from a bank account she's not put a penny into. Priti Patel did it as well. Identity isn't important. Identity politics is terrible until someone attacks them and then suddenly they're a woman of colour.
Rishi Sunak did it. He's taking money from the guy who said all the racist stuff about Diane Abbott. And when he's asked, are you going to take that money? You're still going to take that money? That's a problem. He says he's living proof that the UK isn't racist. Are you? Is that what that is? You're not living proof of that at all. Black people have the right to be as wrong-headed as anybody else. And if they want to be Tories and they favour free market this, if they want to be like racism isn't a problem, racism doesn't exist, immigration's got nothing to do with race, then fine. But then you've decided that racism isn't going to be an issue, that anybody who raises racism in a certain way is some kind of grifter. And then there you are on the grift.
There's this super toxic dance that a lot of the right-wing Tories of colour are doing, which does more to harm and toxify conversations about identity politics, which I just think is a term that's become meaningless, than people who just consistently say, I am a black woman. It informs how I think about politics and it should inform how you engage with me. To people who, as you say, 1 minute are telling their base all this critical race theory, woke stuff, structural oppression, it's all bullshit. Don't listen to them. They're just whiners. They're just not as talented as me. They're just not as hardworking as me. They just didn't have as rich parents as me. And then suddenly, I think there's something that feels particularly distasteful, that then the moment they are attacked, they flip into the stereotype that they have peddled of a snowflake. I don't want people to tell any black women that they should not exist, especially given all the research we have about how black women and women who are visible in public, the amount of misogyny they receive, the amount of racism, misogyny directed to black women in public life. So I think we should all be incredibly mindful when we're engaging with women in public life, even a woman you're having a debate with down the pub. I don't want to give David Tennant a pass because he doesn't need a pass from me. And I do think he misspoke. I think the thing that is happening and that is leading to, especially on gender identity, debates becoming very toxic and not very civil is there is harm being done. And there are people who go out and make sweeping statements about things like gender and things about race. And they are cushioned from some of that harm. Where I have empathy and sympathy for David Tennant and people like him is if you have a non-binary child, or even if you don't, it is very hard to see a community of people who, by and large, are not incredibly privileged, are not incredibly safe, do not have a lot of rights and protections, be kicked around like a political football by people who don't pay the consequences. And the low point of that was Brianna Guy's mother sitting in Parliament while Rishi Sunak trotted out those same talking points that Kemi Badenoch uses about biological sex and gender. And it's not okay to be rude or to be mean or to be dismissive or to wish people not to exist. But it is real that some people are physically, verbally, and politically under attack. And if you care for those people, or even you just have compassion for human beings in general, that is painful. And when you are in pain and when you are angry, you sometimes misspeak. And I think that we do need to have a rethink or a reset around conversations about gender identity. And we also need to recognize that some people have skin in the game and this stuff is nasty and it's harmful and it's horrible. And so for that, I'm not giving him a pass. These things aren't all the same. A Tory donor who says that he thinks Diane Abbott should be shot and makes him hate all black people isn't the same. It's maybe symptomatic of a similar dismissiveness of women, but it isn't the same as David Tennant in an awards speech saying she should shut up or not exist. I don't think anyone's come out of this well, but I guess I do just want to hold a bit of compassion for, people who are trans, who have to sit in all of this horribleness. I have no idea how we get from, the David Tennant, Kemi Badenoch exchange to one where we can have that conversation you want to have. But I think we also have to then remember that as part of that, people are going to be clumsy or emotional. And that's just the reality.
There is one other thing that I think is interesting here, and that I think that the left is not always very good at. There is a sensitivity. I think one trade union leader once said about Priti Patel, She should be on a plane to Rwanda. That would have worked if she'd been a white Anglo. You could have said that. But you can't say that about Priti Patel. Because we have this more diverse leadership, and we can talk about why that's come from the Tories rather than Labour, maybe some other time. But given the way that Labour's been behaving recently, it's not going to come from there for a little while. While we've got this diverse leadership, that demands some discipline and some sensitivity about how you describe, berate, brand, ideologically confront people that you don't agree with. It's very important you still speak with them with the same amount of sensitivity to those things.
So my under the radar, very excited about this, is a G20 report by an economist.
This is so nerdy. It's going to be so nerdy. As soon as you said my under the radar, I'm very excited about this. I thought it's either a report or a kind of a diary entry.
Are you saying I'm a nerd, Gary?
I am saying you're a nerd.
What are you chatting about? Nerd. Write in if you think I'm a nerd. No, I'm a nerd. Okay, so French economist Gabriel Zucman. It gets better. It's a report by an economist. So the backstory is G20, group of developed and developing nations. Lula from Brazil is the current president. And he tasked Gabriel Zucman, I don't know the details of how you task economists in the G20, I'm not that nerdy, to look into a global billionaire tax. And hot off the presses, Gary, this week, Gabriel's written a report. He's got a plan to tax the wealth of the world's 3,000 billionaires. Guess how much it's going to bring in a year, Gary, if we do it?
I don't know.
$250 billion, aka 197 billion pounds.
But hang on, if that's a global tax, where would it go?
So that bit Gabriel hasn't done. But let me talk to you about why this is under the radar. Okay, so all we hear every day is that there's no money. Something I think is economic nonsense. But the prevailing political consensus around this election and globally is we need money. Public services are, in disrepair. Rishi Sunak's wanging on about Keir Starmer's going to tax you £2,000. We're going to cut your taxes. There is a problem that we need to solve, which is paying for things that cost money, like public services, like transitioning to a low carbon economy. People don't want to get taxed. Most of people in the UK and lots of countries are facing a cost of living crisis. They are in real terms poorer. There is one group of people who have not been getting poorer. In fact, they've been getting richer, Gary. Did a bit more nerding out. Between 87 and this year, so basically the span of my lifetime, the global share of wealth of billionaires has gone up from 3% to 14%. These men are sitting on money. So we're all here pointing fingers, chatting about £2,000 in tax, while Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and all their crew are sat on a pile of gold, like Smaug the dragon in Lord of the Rings. Okay, I am a nerd. They're rich. They literally don't know what to do with their money, which is why they're all building spacecrafts. And Gabriel has come up with a fairly robust plan. He hasn't worked out how we divvy it up, but he has worked out how we actually tax these people. $250 billion a year.
I know from living in America, the whole idea of a global anything, of a global tax would demand a global regime. And there's going to be one fucking place. And it could even easily be like a small Caribbean island, or so it's just going to be like, no, we're not going to do that.
Gabriel's system doesn't require every country to participate. There's also been work on taxing multinationals. So it can work even if there are tax havens, because you can do things like applying exit fees if people try and leave your jurisdiction. You have named one of the problems, which I haven't got a fix for yet, which is most billionaires are in America and China. And it's not clear to me that America and China have the same enthusiasm for taxing billionaires that like Lula does in Brazil. But the thing Gabriel's done is he's worked out like roughly how we would do it. And it can be done. Even if like the Cayman Islands or Guernsey or someone was like, come here, billionaires, there's still ways to get that guap, Gary, to get that cash. I'm not saying it's easy, Gary, but I have come up with a really good addendum to Gabriel's plan, not being an economist.
Addendum?
I've got an idea.
Arising.
Because I just think this is one of those things where, there's some problems where if you solve them, like a lot of shit gets better. And obviously they're hard problems, but you're like, if we can unlock this, then like going to make it rain, like, gold-plated public services. So thing I think that Gabriel has missed from his plan, but I think is kind of the key to unlocking this, we've got to make the global billionaire tax a bit of a status symbol. My suggestion to Gabriel, and Gabriel, get in touch if you listen, is that we create some sort of status symbol attached to global billionaire tax. Some sort of free spaceship. They all like space. So maybe it's like a NASA-backed space thingy. Don't know if you remember the Nando's Black Card, kind of an urban legend that like celebrities, footballers like got to have a special elite Nando's Black Card. Some sort of an elite card or pin badge made of gold, or the tiers of workers. An exclusive party that happens annually when you make it into the club that has like a red carpet.
So like a big terrorist target, you mean? With
well,
champagne.
I mean, they're all getting together anyway, and they all at Davos and whatnot, and they've got their private security.
I think that what billionaire people like, they can mix around the billionaires all the time. What they want is dinner with Beyonce or, do you know what I mean, something super, super cool they can then attach themselves to and be like, yeah, I'm a billionaire, but like,
yeah, so like
I'm
a
cool.
big party or like a music video, like Beyonce drops a video with all the billionaires in it, like partying with her.
Yeah, so they get to be in a video.
Fucking great price.
Or they get to be named in a rap song.
I'm reaching the end of the logic loop. And I do see that what I'm doing is trying to incentivize more billionaires. But I still think, Gabrielle, that if you and I sat down, did a little brainstorm, we could come up with something to sort of juice up this tax plan. And then we all win, Gary.
Yeah. Gabrielle, what are you waiting for? Well, my under is Tyler, Tyla.
Ooh, love a bit of Tyler.
A singer, pop singer. A few years back, she referred to herself as a coloured South African, and it kind of all kicked off because Americans were very uncomfortable with the term. And she tried to explain, look, you know, South Africa's different, and people are like, yeah, but you're talking, you know, you're saying this in America. She goes on a Breakfast Club radio show, which is a big African-American radio show. This would have been 2 weeks ago. It's a wide-ranging interview, but I ask her about her coloured identity, and her publicist, someone from the studio, says behind her, can we not? Por favor.
They said por favor.
And the questions... Yeah, and then the questions get a bit irritated, and then she says, kind of move on to the next question. And since then, there's been a bit of a pile-on about whether she's denying her blackness or not. And there are a few things here. First of all, there's the interesting thing of the construction of race, right? So coloured is a term that has meaning in South Africa as a construct, in the same way that black and white is a construct. We're not literally black or white. These are terms that have been found to make sense of the madness in which we live. And that coloured is a term in South Africa which is primarily on the Cape, because the Cape was a coastal community, and you not only had white people coming in, but all sorts of seafarers and then the local African population, which created a mix, let's say. And the South Africans wanted a kind of tiered pigmentocracy. There were white people. There were also Chinese and Indian people who had different kind of rights. And then there was the coloured community. And it always used to be done with theatrical kind of air quotes, coloured. But actually that community, it was a community. It wasn't just a description of a group of people. It wasn't a different word for black. It was a word, it is a word that stands not in opposition to black, but alongside black. And if you're coloured in South Africa, that will shape your life chances, your educational chances, your just in terms of the odds. So it is it has a material meaning. But then outside of South Africa, the term is a kind of dated, as we know, dated kind of use for different ways of saying black. And by the time you get to America, what you have is the wealthiest group of black people in the world, even if there is lots of poverty in Black America, there's also lots of wealth. And the group of people who shape a lot of our racial conversation for better and for worse. George Floyd is murdered. That produces a certain kind of outcome, but then a kid is murdered in Birmingham or Bristol and it doesn't produce the same kind of outcome. I personally grew up knowing much more about African American history than I did about Black British history. And then finally, you have the studio control or attempt to control the conversation. And here I do identify with the people who are asking her questions in the Breakfast Club. To have a sort of corporate suit, and I've had this, sitting in a conversation and saying, oh, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. When what you're talking about is a really reasonable question, which was respectfully asked and which relates to what they've said or their work. That thing of feeling controlled, which is a real problem. And apparently, I'm not sure of the rest of this, she had asked for them not to go there. But I think, well, then don't go on a show.
Just from a professional point of view, I think it's bad PR and comms for your solution to be don't ask about it, don't talk about it, especially when she's been on record and everyone has Google. So I agree. I think it's like, I know celebrity interviews are a bit more, there's more of a culture of being able to set parameters on them than other interviews. So I agree with you that on the sort of tactical, she said something already, so just develop what it is she should say. It can be hard sometimes because obviously African Americans experience racism and discrimination. I've found sometimes for them to hear that their experience is also a very dominant one in the Black diaspora. And then, the thing that really feels lacking is just like a bit of curiosity, because it's quite interesting, like what it is to be coloured in South Africa. There's like an interesting history and threads and things that get pulled, but instead we get into the publishers shut it down, or people who find that word offensive, shut it down, and then no one's learning.
And I think, to be fair, she did try and explain it. It reminded me a bit of being on Twitter. I was talking about the royal wedding, and I said something like, that's why I'm a Republican. And this woman came back at me and was like, yeah, you Black Republicans are all the same. And I said, no, I mean a Republican that doesn't believe in the royal family, not one that doesn't believe in ice caps and, healthcare. And there's just a kind of, the more powerful you are, the less you need to know, and the more people have to adapt to you. And every now and then there's a glitch in the matrix, and this is one of them. You hope people are going to understand it as a kind of, they're going to learn from it, but they don't always. Sometimes they just want to double down.
Well, that's a great example and very, very American. I guess when you're big and powerful and there's a lot of you, you don't have to learn about other countries. Because, similarly, I learned loads of American history at school and about the American civil rights movement and a lot less about British history. So that's been Over the Top and Under the Radar. The next week's episode will be a bit late because we're going to record it first thing in the morning after the general election. But we might have another bonus interview episode to keep you going. Thanks for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Make sure you sign up to our newsletter at overunderpod.com.
And connect with us on social media at over_under_pod_.